Chapter 5. A Man's Word. When Lawler finally emerged from the schoolhouse door, there was no one about. Far down the street, in front of a building, he saw a group of children. Lawler recognized the building as the Wolf's Saloon, so named because of the river that ran through the town. He had no doubt that Singleton had entered the building. That would explain the presence of the children in front of it. But Lawler merely glanced toward town. He turned instantly and gazed long into the great stretch of plain that ran eastward. He caught sight of a dot on his right, so far away that it was dim in the haze of distance, and he knew Ruth had followed his advice. Lawler watched the dot until it vanished, and when he turned again to Mount Red King, his color had returned, though something of the mighty passion that had gripped him was still swimming in his eyes. He sent Red King into town at a slow lope, not even looking toward the wolf as he passed it, but hearing subdued voices that seemed to die away. As he drew close, he brought Red King to a halt in front of the brick building in which Gary Warden had his office, dismounted, tied the horse to a hitching rail, and strode to an open doorway from which ran the stairs that led to the second floor. A gilt sign on the open door advised him of the location of Warden's office. With one foot on the stairs, ready to ascend, Lawler heard a woman's voice floating downward, coming from the landing above. "Well, goodbye, Gary," said the voice. "I'll see you tonight." Lawler heard a man's voice answering, the words unintelligible to him. Then the woman laughed banteringly. Then came the sound of a door closing and the light tread of a woman's foot on the stairs. Lawler had halted when he heard the woman's voice. He now stepped back in the narrow hallway against the open door to give the woman room to pass him. Turning his back to the stairs, unconcernedly waiting, subconsciously realizing that the woman was descending, he gazed past the station building to see the empty corrals on the other side of the railroad track. His eyes narrowed with satisfaction, for there would be room for the 1,000 head of cattle that Blackburn and the other men of the Circle L outfit would bring to Willits in the morning. There would be no delay, and no camp on the edge of town awaiting the emptying of the corral. When he heard the woman's step on the bottom of the stairs, he turned and faced her. She was looking straight at him, and as their eyes met, he saw hers widen eloquently. She half paused as she started to pass him, and it seemed to him that she was about to speak. He smiled gravely, puzzled, hesitant, for her manner indicated that she knew him or was mistaking him for another. He paused also, and both stood for a fleeting instant face to face, silent. Lawler noted that the woman was beautiful, well-dressed, with a manner unmistakably Eastern. He decided that she had mistaken him for someone of her acquaintance, for he felt assured he never had seen her before. He bowed, saying lowly, "I beg your pardon, ma'am. I reckon it's a case of mistaken identity." "Why," she returned, laughing, "I thought sure I knew you. Are you quite certain that I don't?" There was guile in her eyes, so far back that he could not see it, or so cleverly veiled with something else that he was not aware of it. It seemed to him that the eyes were merely engaging and frankly curious. He did not see the admiration in them, the elation, and the demure coquetry. "I reckon you'll have to be the judge of that, ma'am. You certainly have the advantage of me. You are—" Her pause was eloquent. "I am Cain Lawler, ma'am." He looked into her eyes for the disappointment he expected to find there, and saw only eager interrogation. "Oh, then I don't know you. I beg your pardon. I reckon there's no harm done," smiled Lawler. He bowed again, noting that she looked intently at him, her eyes still wide and filled with something he could not fathom. And when, halfway up the stairs, he looked back, curious, subtly attracted to the woman, he saw her standing in the doorway, ready to go out, watching him over her shoulder. He laughed and opened the door of Gary Warden's office. Warden was sitting at his desk. He turned at the sound of the door opening and faced Lawler inquiringly. Perhaps in Lawler's eyes there still remained a trace of the cold passion that had seized him in the schoolhouse. It may have been that what Lawler had heard of Gary Warden was reflected in his gaze, a doubt of Warden's honorableness, or perhaps in Lawler's face he observed signs which told him that before him stood a man of uncommon character. At any rate, Warden was conscious of a subtle pulse of antagonism, a quick dislike and jealousy. Warden could not have told what had aroused the latter emotion, though he was subconsciously aware that it had come when he had noted the rugged, manly strength of Lawler's face, that the man was attractive, and that he admired him despite his dislike. That knowledge aroused a dull rage in him. His cheeks flushed, his eyes glowed with it, but Warden's smile contradicted his thoughts. He managed that so cleverly that many men watching him might have been deceived. In Lawler's keen eyes, however, glowed understanding, a knowledge of Warden's character that vindicated the things he had heard about the man, the tentative suggestions that Warden was not a worthy successor to Leffingwell. That knowledge, though, would not have bothered him, had he not seen in Warden's eyes something that seemed to offer him a personal affront. As quickly as Warden had veiled his eyes from Lawler, the latter had seen the dislike in them, the antagonism, and the rage that had stained his cheeks. He had come to Warden's office with an open mind. Now he looked at the man with a saturnine smile in which there was amused contempt. Assuredly the new buyer did not measure up to Jim Leffingwell's size, as Blackburn had suggested. Therefore, aware that he could not meet this man on the basis of friendliness that had distinguished all his relations with Jim Leffingwell, Lawler's voice was crisp and businesslike. "You're Gary Warden?" At the latter's short, affirmative nod, Lawler continued, "I'm Kane Lawler of the Circle L. I've come to make arrangements with you about buying my cattle. I've got 8,000 head, good clean stock. They're above the average, but I'm keeping my word with Jim Leffingwell and turning them in at the market price. That's $25, delivered at the railroad company's corral in town here." He looked straight at Lawler, his face expressionless, except for the slight smile that tugged at the corners of his mouth, which might have been indicative of vindictiveness or triumph. 30, smiled Lawler. That was the price Leffingwell agreed to pay. Warden appeared to be blandly amused. Leffingwell agreed to pay 30, you say? Well, Leffingwell always was a little reckless. That's why my company asked for his resignation. But if you have a written contract with Leffingwell in which it appears that Leffingwell acted for the company, why, of course, we'll have to take your stock at the contract price. Let me see it, if you please. There was no written contract. I had Jim Leffingwell's word, which was all I ever needed. Leffingwell's word, smiled Warden. Unfortunately, a man's word is not conclusive proof, meaning that Jim Leffingwell was lying when he told you he'd agreed to pay $30 for my stock this fall. Oh no, I don't insinuate against Leffingwell's veracity, but the company requires a written agreement in a case like this, where the former representative— We won't argue that, interrupted Lawler. Jim Leffingwell told me he'd had a talk with you about my agreement with him, and Jim said you'd carry it out. Mr. Leffingwell did not mention the matter to me. I'd hate to think Jim Leffingwell lied to me, said Lawler slowly. Warden's face grew crimson. "Meaning that I am a liar, I suppose," he said, his voice quavering with sudden passion. Lawler's level gaze made him stiffen in his chair. Lawler's smile, cold and mirthless, brought a pulse of apprehension through him, and Lawler's voice, slow, clear, and distinct, forced the blood from his face, leaving it pale. "I don't let any man twist my words so that they mean something I don't intend them to mean, Mr. Man. If I intended to call you a liar, I'd have said it to you mighty plain, so there'd be no doubt in your mind about it. So far as I know, you're not a liar. I'm telling you this, though. A man's word in this country has got to be backed by his performances, and he's got to have memory enough to know when he gives his word. I reckon that where you come from, men give their word without knowing it. Maybe that's what happened to you when Jim Leffingwell spoke to you about his agreement with me. Anyway, I feel that charitable enough toward you to advance that explanation. You can take that for what it seems worth to you, and I won't be bothered any, no matter which way you take it." Lawler turned toward the door. On the threshold he paused, for Warden's voice reached him. "You'd better sell at 25, Mr. Lawler." Warden's voice was low and smooth. He seemed to have decided to accept the charity offered him by Lawler, but there was mockery in his voice, and his eyes were alight with cunning. In the atmosphere about him was complacency, which suggested that Warden knew exactly what he was doing, that he had knowledge unsuspected by Lawler, and that he had no doubt that ultimately Lawler would accept his offer. "Not a steer at 25, returned Lawler. "That price means immediate shipment," pursued Warden. "The railroads are having some trouble with their rolling stock. It is hard to get cars. Some shippers are not getting them at all. And the shortage will grow. Perhaps it will. I don't blame you for buying as low as you can." "That's business, Warden. I heard through Lou Brainerd of the Two Diamond that owners in the South Basin over at Shotwell were offered 40 just before the roundup. I was kicking myself for making that agreement with Leafingwell at 30. But I intended to keep my word with him, but I feel mighty free now to sell where I can get the market price." 25 is the market price," said Warden. "Just before the roundup, there was some nervousness, it is true, and some buyers were offering 40, and they contracted for some at that price. But that was before we made." He hesitated, reddened, and then went on quickly, plainly embarrassed, endeavoring to conceal his embarrassment by lighting a cigar. "It was before the market broke," he went on. "The market is glutted. The West raised more cattle this season than ever before. There is no demand, and the price had to tumble. A good many cattle owners will be glad to take 20, and even 15 before long. But if there are no cars," smiled Lawler. Again he saw Warden's face redden. "A shortage of cars would mean a shortage of cattle in the East, I reckon," went on Lawler. "And a shortage of cattle would mean higher prices for those that got through. But I'm not arguing, nor am I accepting 25 for my cattle. I reckon I'll have to ship my stock east." "Well, I wish you luck," said Warden. He turned his back to Lawler, bending over his desk. Something in his voice, a hint of mockery tempered with rage, brought Lawler to a pause as he crossed the threshold of the doorway. He turned and looked back at Warden, puzzled, for it seemed to him that Warden was defying him, and he seemed to feel the atmosphere of complacence that surrounded the man. His manner hinted of secret knowledge, strongly. It gave Lawler an impression of something stealthy, clandestine. Warden's business methods were not like Leffingwell's. Leffingwell had been bluff, frank, and sincere. There was something in Warden's manner that seemed to exude craft and guile. The contrast between the two men was sharp, acute, startling, and Lawler descended the stairs, feeling that he had just been in contact with something that crept instead of walking upright like a man. A recollection of the woman he had met at the foot of the stairs came to Lawler as he descended, and thought of her did much to erase the impression he had gained of Warden. He grinned, thinking of how he had caught her watching him as he had mounted the stairs, and then he reddened as he realized that he would not have known she was watching him had he not turned to look back at her. He found himself wondering about her, why she had been in Warden's office, and who she could be. And then he remembered his conversation with Blackburn about chaperones, and he decided she must be that woman to whom Blackburn had referred as a woman at Leffingwell's old place, keepin' Warden company. He frowned and crossed the street, going toward the railroad station building, in which he would find the freight agent. And as he walked, he was considering another contrast, that afforded by his glimpse of the strange woman and Ruth Hamlin, and presently he found himself smiling with pleasure, with a mental picture of Ruth's face before him, her clear, direct-looking, honest eyes, with no guile in them, like that which had glowed in the eyes that had gazed into his at the foot of the stairs, over in Corwin's store, where Aunt Hannah had gone to make some small purchases. The woman who had encountered Lawler in the hall was talking with the proprietor. Aunt Hannah was watching a clerk. "Della," she called, "do you want anything?" "Nothing, Auntie," returned the woman. Then she lowered her voice, speaking to Corwin. "So he owns the Circle L? Is that a large ranch?" "One of the biggest in the Wolf River section," declared Corwin. "Then Lawler must be wealthy." "I reckon he's got wads of dust, ma'am." The woman's eyes glowed with satisfaction. "Well," she said, "I was just curious about him. He is a remarkably striking-looking man, isn't he?" "You've hit it, ma'am," grinned Corwin. "I've been years trying to think up a word that would fit him. You've hit it. He's different. Looks like one of them statesmen with cowpuncher duds on, like a governor or something, which is out of place here." The woman smiled affirmation. "So he does," she said, reflectively. "He is big and imposing and strikingly handsome, and he is educated too, isn't he?" "I reckon he is," said Corwin. "Privately, that is. His ma was a scholar of some kind back east, before she married Luke Lawler and come out here to live with him. Luke's dead now, died 5 years ago. Luke was a wolf, ma'am, with a gun. He could shoot the buttons off your coat with his eyes shut, and he was so all fired fast with his gun that he'd make a streak of lightning look like it was loafing. Luke had a heap of man in him, ma'am, and Cain is just as much of a man as his dad was, I reckon. Luke was—" "About Cain Lawler," interrupted the woman. "You say he is well educated?" "That's about the only thing I've got agin him, ma'am. I hold that no cattleman has got a right to know so derned much. It's mighty dangerous to his folks if he ever gets any. Now take Cain Lawler. If he was to marry a girl that wasn't educated like him, and he'd begin to get fool notions about hisself, why, it'd make it pretty hard for the girl to get along with him." He grinned. "But accordin' to what I hear, Cain ain't going to marry no ignoramus exactly, for he's took a shine to Ruth Hamlin, Willits's school teacher. She's got a heap of brains, that girl, and I reckon she'd lope alongside of Cain wherever he went." The woman frowned. Is Mr. Lawler going to marry Ruth Hamlin? Corwin looked sharply at her. What do you suppose he's fanning up to her for? He demanded. Neither of them is a heap flighty, I reckon, and Kane will marry her if she'll have him, according to the way things generally go. The woman smiled as she left Corwin and joined the older woman at the front of the store. She smiled as she talked with the other woman, and she smiled as they both walked out of the store and climbed into a buckboard. The smile was one that would have puzzled Corwin, for it was inscrutable, baffling. Only one thing Corwin might have seen in it: determination, and that might have puzzled him also. Chapter 6. The Invisible Power. Jay Simmons, the freight agent, was tilted comfortably in a chair near a window, looking out upon the railroad platform when Lawler stepped into the office. The office was on the second floor, and from a side window, the agent had seen Lawler coming toward the station from Warden's office. He had been sitting near the side window, but when he saw Lawler approaching the station, he had drawn his chair to one of the front windows, and now, apparently, he was surprised to see Lawler, for when the latter opened the door of the office, Simmons exclaimed, with assumed heartiness, "Well, if it ain't Kane Lawler." Simmons was a rotund man, bald, with red hair that had a faded, washed-out appearance. His eyes were large, pale blue in color, with a singularly ingratiating expression which was made almost yearning by light, colorless lashes. Simmons' eyes, however, were unreliable as an index to his character. One could not examine very far into them. They seemed to be shallow, baffling. Simmons did not permit his eyes to betray his thoughts. He used them as masks to hide from prying eyes the things that he did not wish others to see. "Come a visitin', Lawler?" asked Simmons, as Lawler halted midway in the room and smiled faintly at the greeting he received. "Not exactly, Simmons. Not exactly, eh? I reckon that means you've got some business. I'll be glad to help you out, if I can. I'm going to ship my stock east, Simmons, and I'm wanting cars for them. 8,000 head. Simmons still sat in the chair beside the window. He now pursed his lips, drew his brows together, and surveyed Lawler attentively. 8,000 head, eh? Sort of whooped 'em up this season, didn't you? I reckon Gary Warden took 'em all. Warden and I couldn't get together. I'm shipping them east myself. Consigning 'em to who? They'll go to Leggett and Mellert. They're an independent concern, ain't they? Yes, that's the firm my father shipped to before Jim Leffingwell opened an office here. Simmons locked his fingers together and squinted his eyes at Lawler. He said. Then he was silent, seemingly meditating. Then he shook his head slowly, from side to side. Apparently, he was gravely considering a problem and could find no solution for it. He cleared his throat, looked at Lawler, then away from him. I reckon it's going to be a lot bothersome to ship that bunch of stock, Lawler. A heap bothersome. There's been half a dozen other owners in to see me within the last week or so, and I couldn't give them no encouragement. There ain't an empty car in the state. Lawler was watching him intently, and the expression in his eyes embarrassed Simmons. He flushed, cleared his throat again, and then shot a belligerent glance at Lawler. It ain't my fault, not a bit of it, Lawler. I've been losing sleep over this thing. Losing sleep, I tell you. I've telegraphed every damned point on the line. This road is swept clean as a whistle. No cars, they wire back to me. No cars. I've read that answer until there ain't no room for anything else in my brain. The worst of it is, I'm getting blamed for it. You'd think I was running the damned railroad, that I was giving orders to the president. Lem Caldwell, of the Star, over to Keekle's, was in here yesterday, threatening to herd ride me if I didn't have 100 cars here this day, week. He'd been to see Gary Warden, the same as you have, and he was figuring on playing her independent. And some more owners have been in. I don't know what in hell the company is thinking of. No cars, and the roundup just over. Simmons had worked himself into a near frenzy. His face had become bloated with passion. He was breathing fast, but Lawler noted that his eyes were shifty, that he turned them everywhere except upon Lawler. Simmons now paused, seemingly having exhausted his breath. "I've just left Gary Warden," said Lawler slowly. "He offered his price for my stock. He told me if I accepted, it meant there would be no delay, that they would be shipped immediately. Warden seems to know where he can get cars." Simmons' face reddened deeply, the flush suffusing his neck and ears. He shot one swift glance at Lawler and then looked down. In that swift glance, however, Lawler had seen a fleeting gleam of guilt, of insincerity. Lawler laughed shortly, a sound that made Simmons shoot another swift glance at him. "How is it that Gary Warden figures on getting cars, Simmons?" said Lawler. Simmons got up, his face flaming with rage. "You're accusing me of holding something back, eh? You're calling me a liar. You're thinking I'm—" "Easy there, Simmons." There was a chill in Lawler's voice that brought Simmons rigid with a snap, as though he had suddenly been drenched with cold water. The flush left his face. He drew a deep, quick breath, then stood with open mouth, watching Lawler. "Simmons," said the latter, "it has been my experience that whenever a man is touchy about his veracity, he will bear watching. You and Gary Warden have both flared up from the same spark. I don't know whether this thing has been framed up or not, but it looks mighty suspicious. It is the first time there has been a lack of cars after a roundup. Curiously, the lack of cars is coincident with Gary Warden's first season as a buyer of cattle. I don't say that you've got anything to do with it, but it's mighty plain you know something about it. I'm not asking you to tell what you know, because if there is a frame-up, it's a mighty big thing, and you are about as important a figure in it as a yellow coyote in a desert. I reckon that's all, Simmons. You can tell your boss that Kane Lawler says he can go to hell." He wheeled, crossed the floor, went out of the room, and left the door open behind him. Simmons could hear his step on the stairs. Then Simmons sat down again, drew a big red bandana handkerchief from a hip pocket, and wiped some big beads of perspiration from his forehead. He was breathing fast, and his face was mottled with purple spots. He got up, ran to a side window, and watched Lawler until the latter vanished behind a building opposite Gary Warden's office. Again Simmons mopped his brow, and now he drew a breath of relief. "Whew," he said aloud. "I'm glad that's over. I've been dreading it. He's the only one in the whole bunch that I was afraid of, and he's wise. There'll be hell in this section now, pure, unadulterated hell, and no mistake."